Welcome back to spoiler season for Path of Exile 319 Lake of Kalandra. Today, we're going to be talking about two unique items that have now been buffed. Or have they? Because in this case, this is the first item that isn't necessarily buffed so much as changed. You're not going to be using it nearly as much for its original purpose. That is Victario's Flight. The other item that I'll get into a little bit later, which has definitely been buffed, is Vaal Caress. So what does Victario's Flight do currently? It has Dexterity, Intelligence, really bad evasion rating, a little bit of movement speed, 10% of damage taken recouped as mana, and 10% move speed that also applies to nearby allies. This makes it a very good support item for your Animate Guardian, but not a particularly good or useful item in Path of Exile. Which is why it should be no surprise to anyone that the main use of it is on an Animated Guardian. Now, occasionally you will see this on a support build, you will see someone using it, but overall, it's honestly not that great as an item. However, it's very good when you're getting a positive effect on top of everything else. Their cast is much the same way. Not a great item, probably not worth wearing on your character most of the time, but very good when you don't actually have to wear it. And this is why I say it's not getting buffed so much as it's getting reworked, because it's not going to be an item for your Animate Guardian anymore. So let's take a look at the new Victario's Flight. It has the same dex int, it still has low evasion. The movement speed, I don't know if it's 17% or if it's now 15 to 20. There's no more mana recoup, which is a little bit unfortunate now that someone's actually going to be wearing it. There's also, I'm going to guess, 15 to 20% movement speed on low life, which means if you want go fast boots for a low life build, this is potentially a cool option. And then finally, Quicksilver Flasks also apply to nearby allies. So it's gone from an AG item to a support item. The reason it's no longer good on your AG is the AG isn't going to be using a Quicksilver Flask. Now most likely, GGG has envisioned that this will be used by a low life support build, hence the additional movement speed on low life. Though if you're just a regular old life build or even a CI build, you can also use this item, you just won't be going quite as fast. But how useful is this going to be? Is this actually an upgrade, or is it now an item that doesn't really have a place in the game? That's a kind of good question, because the stats on the item are mediocre, and intentionally so. You're wearing it because you want your Quicksilver Flasks to apply to your allies. The problem here is that the word nearby was used, and this word doesn't mean very much. Anytime you see the word recently, you can just delete the word in your head and replace it with 4 seconds. But nearby does not have a standard definition. In some cases, such as with the Gravebind gloves, nearby only refers to things that are actually very close to your character, which limits the item's usefulness. In other cases, nearby, such as nearby enemies have -9 to a resistance, has about the same range as your average aura, which means it's very effective. If this is in the Gravebind category, I don't think it's a very good item, and it will probably see little to no use. If it's in the latter category, where it has the range of an aura, then we're talking. Since if you're a curse bot or an aura bot, there's a very good chance you'll want to keep your party members within that range anyway. Maybe you have something like a blasphemy aura, or maybe you're just a straight aura bot, and if they aren't in range of your auras, they're not going to be getting all those nice juicy buffs. And in terms of whether or not it gets used, the other question of course is, does this mean your party can drop their Quicksilver Flask? Or instead, will your carry be wearing a Mageblood or a Headhunter and going so fast that the support still can't keep up, and thus the carry has to have their own Quicksilver, which somewhat limits the applicability. Then again, who knows, maybe that's exactly how you keep up. The carry doesn't have a Quicksilver, so if they get a little bit too far ahead, the now speedier support can pop their own Quicksilver and zoom over with the rest of the support crew, your Curse Bot, Aura Bot, whatever the person isn't, and you kind of get the point. Regardless of whether or not the item itself ends up being good, the goal appears to be to foster more player choice. You're not always going to use Victario's Flight as the default boots on your Animated Guardian. I expect this means we could also see nerfs to other items that feel like a shoo-in, things that you don't feel like you have any choice in, because after all, it's the best thing for the slot. One complaint I definitely have though, please stop using nearby. Either standardize it so that nearby has a fixed distance and it's always that, or just put the radius on the item, put the units on the item, something so that we can differentiate what nearby means without having to guess and without having to do a lot of in-game testing. So what do you think? Are you a solo player who isn't really interested in this item, or do you do group play and you're looking to add this to your support build? or maybe force your support to wear it, since they definitely want to keep their Quicksilver flasks for themselves. One important note about this: a lot of modifiers to flask effect specifically say effective flasks applied to you. What this means is if you have increased effective flasks applied to you, and this flask is applied to you, very likely that will scale the Quicksilver effect. However, if you have increased effective flasks applied to you, and you're using the flask applying it to allies, it will be applied at its base value, not the value that affects you. Now there is one more item that I want to talk about today, that is the reworked Vaal Caress. Before I do though, a quick reminder that if you've been enjoying the video, please leave a like, as that's a great way to help me out in the YouTube algorithm. If you have any friends who use an animated guardian, maybe show them the video and ask their opinion on Victarios. For more content, be sure to get subscribed and ring that notification bell, as I'll continue to post updates throughout the PoE spoiler season. Or if you want to watch something immediately, maybe you're interested in gaming news and want to see what's going on outside of Path of Exile, click through the card right now for a video on my second channel going over some recent gaming news, including stuff with VR chat and easy anti-cheat, the end of Project Neptune, and some stuff Twitch is doing which it absolutely shouldn't be. A special thanks to my patrons and YouTube channel members for the continued support. More about how you can support at the end of the video. For now though, let's talk about Vaal Caress. Right now, Vaal Caress gives +2 to level of socketed Vaal gems, you gain Onslaught for 5 seconds when using a Vaal skill, it has some decent cold res, decent life, and honestly pretty mediocre armor and evasion. There isn't a good place for Vaal Caress in the game right now. They're not too bad as something that you just stick your Vaal Righteous Fire in, especially if you're corrupted or double corrupted. But their stats aren't exactly impressive, and there's certainly not that much reason to use them when you could instead have +2 to level of socketed AoE gems on almost anything. In theory, the Onslaught for 5 seconds is nice. In practice, who casts a Vaal skill every 5 seconds? Maybe back in the days of Legacy Soul Ripper, but these days, not really. Instead, you're going to be limited by your soul gain, your recovery, maybe you're using the Sextant, I don't know. Overall, spamming Vaal skills at that frequency doesn't make all that much sense, and if you socketed 4 different Vaal gems in to try to rotate them, things are still going to eat each other's souls, you still have to deal with soul gain prevention, and it's just a big old mess. The new Vaal Caress, on the other hand, are really interesting. Now it is +5 to level of all Vaal gems, which is huge. It's important to note that if you have a Vaal skill gem in there, both parts of a gem do get the +5 levels. So let's say Vaal Spark, a level 20 Vaal Spark would be a level 25 Spark and a level 25 Vaal Spark, because it's the gem that has the Vaal tag, not the skill. However, there's now a new downside, which is -5 to level of all non-Vaal gems. What this means is you get a big boost to your Vaal skill at the cost of 5 levels to any socketed supports. So Enlighten, Enhance, or Empower will be pretty much useless with these gloves. And similarly, Awaken gems that often require that you hit level 5 will probably not be hitting level 5 when socketed into these gloves. Maybe you get some crazy double corruption that gives +4 level to your support and you have some global gem levels, but it hardly feels worth it to use it with Awaken supports given the penalty. It looks to be retaining both the life and the cold res, which is good. That makes it a pretty generic all-round item. The evasion and armor rating remains mediocre, but that's not really why you're wearing it anyway, and you now gain Onslaught for 20 seconds when using a Vaal skill. And that's really cool, especially for people who want to do something like Vaal Haste, or Vaal Grace, or Vaal Righteous Fire, or any other rotating buff. 20 seconds is a really solid amount of time, especially if you have an effect on you that increases buff duration. And now it's probably actually feasible to have 100% uptime on this while mapping. So not only are the gloves a great way to boost the damage or effect of your Vaal skill, but it could be a pretty good way to have permanent Onslaught as well. But sometimes when you're making a mapping build, that's just the cost you'll have to pay. So what are a couple of interesting use cases for this item? The first that immediately came to mind was buffs. You could stick a Vaal Righteous Fire in there, maybe a Vaal Grace, or a Vaal Haste, and you get a really super juiced thing without much opportunity cost, since the stats on the gloves are pretty decent. Especially if you double corrupt it and you get +2/+2 gems, now you're looking at +9 gem levels. Of course, ideally you wouldn't want to stick just 1 gem in here. You'd want to stick 4 in. So maybe you're actually using Grace, and you stick your Vaal Grace in here. Then maybe you're actually using Haste, and you stick your Vaal Haste in here. And you're actually not using Righteous Fire, but you stick Vaal Righteous Fire in as well. You now have 3 gems that are level 25, or maybe even level 26, before any corruptions. Another use of this would be for some sort of secondary support skill. Let's say your build does giga single target damage. Maybe you're a mana bond build, and you can nuke bosses, but you can't really do anything to clear the screen. In fact, a random pack of monsters takes you about as long as killing Cirrus. In this case, what you'd be able to do is put on Vaal Caress, put in maybe a Vaal Spark, link up a couple of decent support gems, and due to the massive +9 levels from your double corrupted Vaal Caress, all of a sudden you're able to clear just fine using the Vaal Spark. Remember, even if you don't have the souls, Spark is still a perfectly usable skill, and the 4 link with +9 levels is going to be kind of equivalent to a 6 link. Certainly enough for clearing trash, and again, you can always use your single target nuke if you encounter a Tenkiei rare or a boss. I think this item is really strong, and it's going to get a lot of use. Not only can it become absolutely god tier if you hit the right double corruption, but it gives you a lot of options early on as a budget item. I don't expect it to become super expensive as a result of the changes. So let's say you're an Aura bot, and you want to get some cheap Aura levels on all of your purities, since you want to get them at least to 23, and maybe you don't have the global gem levels to do so. Instead of having to worry about a bunch of corruptions, global gem level stuff, etc., well, just stick them all in here. Impurity of Fire, Ice, and Lightning will now be level 25 Purity of Fire, Ice, and Lightning. If you want to know more about why level 25 purities are so good, be sure to check out my video on resistances, which is in the card right now. So far, we've seen 5 updated unique items, and I have to say, the new Vaal Caress could be the most powerful we've seen so far, but all of these items are great. Instead of being generic replacements for rares, they have a purpose. They have a niche. They won't be used by everyone, but they'll be incredibly valuable to the builds that do utilize them. And so, I'm curious, how would you utilize Vaal Caress? Maybe as a massive single target nuke button with a large cooldown? Maybe you'd use it for clearing when your main skill does all that single target damage. Or of course, you could just shove in all the buffs and auras and kind of keep them fire and forget, maybe not even use the Vaal versions of the skills. Let me know some of your thoughts down in the comments below. A special thanks to my patrons and YouTube channel members. Your support helps keep me independent and allows me to turn down things like sketchy mobile game sponsorships. You can do so for as low as $1 a month over on Patreon, or if you want to support me completely for free, then you can join the community by hopping into my Discord, link below. If you want more content, check out my second channel, 10 Gaming Thoughts. It's a place that I use to review games, ramble my way through video essays, and a lot more. Or of course, you can just click the suggested video in the card right now. I hope you learned something today, and maybe I'll see you again sometime soon.